halfway there.
Hocus Pocus.
Great. You know what was my favorite Halloween movie as a kid though?
What?
Halloween Town.
Oh, I was just about to
Great.
say, bro, if you
Great
don't say
movie.
Halloween Town, we're not
Great.
friends no more.
Great flick.
Yo, that's humor. Yo, and then in like the third or fourth movie, they all of a sudden decided they're gonna switch the like girl that plays whatever her name is, like the main character, and they're like, oh no, y'all would never know. It's like Aunt Viv in what's it called in Family Matters. You remember that, Marcus? When they
Aunt
changed
Viv is from Fresh Prince.
Aunt Viv from Fresh Prince when they had light skin Aunt Viv, and then they had dark skin Aunt Viv for like the last 2 seasons.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about
and just absolutely zero explanation. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a totally different woman. It's like Harry Potter and Hagrid. I mean, not Hagrid, Dumbledore.
That was like the Home Alone 1 to Home Alone 2 switch was like a real switch up when they introduced Macaulay Culkin in the New York one. I don't know if anybody saw that, but there was a different.
What? No, Macaulay Culkin was the first.
Isn't the first one too?
Yeah, he's the first and second one. The third one is
the third one. The third one is the kid with the brown hair with the bowl cut, and you're just like, who
the fuck is this kid? Yeah. No, thanks.
Welcome. What's up, Carlos? What's up, AJ?
Hi guys.
I'm so happy you don't have COVID wishing. That's actually the best thing that ever happened to me when you texted me that. I was so nervous. Yo, I'm not gonna fret. I was very nervous that I was gonna get a call from wrong.
I was so nervous too. No, I woke up and like I went to bed and I was like feeling weird, and I woke up twice and like coughing, and I was like, this is not a good sign. But then I got tested the next day.
Yo, you fucking.
I don't know why. That's never happened to me, bro. Who wakes up in the middle of coughing like an old person? But whatever.
It was just the fact that you were a degenerate for a little bit of period of time, and your body was just catching up to the fact that you were on the degenerate schedule.
Yeah, I agree.
Welcome.
Oh my God, it's the new dog.
Oh, the new doggo.
Yeah, he's so cute.
Hopper vibes. I'm here for that. We're a little light on numbers today.
All right, so I am here trying to figure out a camera.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why. Yeah, that's kind of strange. Does it even give you an option to like turn it on?
It does. I don't have a webcam. That's the weird thing. I'm trying to use my phone as a camera. So I may just pull out my laptop because that would be easier.
Gotcha.
Let me pull that out real quick.
Yeah, you would think. We usually don't get started until about 5 minutes in anyways, because nobody ever shows up exactly on time. It's a Sunday. Got things to do.
Nah, honestly, everybody's pretty good about it because all things considered, Marcus, they could be on IST like me.
That's true. That's fair. But that would be like a good solid hour late.
That's what I'm saying. It's like
showing up at
45 minutes or go 45 minutes.
For an event at 5 or 4:30. The hour and a half. That's when it really gets bad.
Yeah, facts.
But it's I don't think we had too many people for the Eventbrite today. It's hard, obviously can't expect everybody every week. We're gonna work on figuring out ways to like reach out to exponentially more groups and campus organizations. Thanks to Nicole's idea was definitely very good in terms of like reaching out to all those organizations to try and get people from all over the place, all different types of whatever. But I actually think even within just from like the brief conversations that we've had about this particular topic for today, I feel like even our little group may have some starkly differing opinions about this. I feel like police is like, a bunch of like college kids have X, Y, and Z view about that, but for the most part, I feel like guns is definitely one of the more consistently controversial things because it is rooted in constitutionality. It's also rooted in the ideas of like personal safety and like all that stuff. So I feel like it's pretty important anyways. There's kind of vibes though. This is more like a squad live stream. We're all live streaming together. That's rather than like this is our this is our event. The event is the live stream of our little conversation that we're about to have here, because I feel like it'll be interesting. I feel like it'll be good. It'll be good. Wait for Oscar to come up in the room.
Who's?
I miss that guy.
Dude, how could you not?
Yeah.
What a swell guy.
I miss a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
LA. I actually can't believe though that it is October. It's like the middle of October, and it was just March, like yesterday though. It was literally just March yesterday. And now it's cold and there's fall colors and all that fun jazz. But it is 5:05, so we are gonna get started. People could like trickle in or whatever on their way. You know, this is a everybody's friends here, no shame environment. Anybody wants to boost this on Insta real quick or on whatever form of social media that they see fit, or send the live stream out to people. It's in our Facebook event so that people can be on it. The nice thing I do like about Facebook live stream is that it stays there forever after. So like that is essentially a recording, and all of those links go in like our starter pack, the resources starter pack after the fact. They're all still like in my and Sherrod's Instagram bios. I don't super love Instagram, but like for those purposes, it's pretty all right. What's up, Alyssa? How you doing? Long time no see.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Where's the rest of the gang though?
Yeah, where's the squad at?
Where's the squad? Rip them, I guess. That's sad. But let's get it going. Now that Alyssa's here, we can actually start. We were just waiting for her and nobody else. And for those of you, we know pretty much everybody here. But I'm Marcus, and that is Sherrod.
What's that?
And we're gonna get it going for today. I honestly kind of am excited for this little squad talk.
I was about to say, I like the smaller vibe.
Yeah, I like the smaller vibes. I like the little squad talk, and hopefully this will be a good recording that we can kind of push out after the fact, because I feel like people's opinions on this issue tend to be very, very wide ranging and very diverse. But the reason why we even picked this as a topic was really just because I feel like this is one of the issues that has been kind of like involved in a lot of what we've been talking about recently on the news and in the news cycle, right? With all of the things that have to do with like violence and racial violence, like firearms are definitely a component of this much larger argument. And so I'm from Rochester, New York, upstate New York, not that proud. But Rochester is a pretty violent place to be honest. But just several weeks ago, right when I moved back home, there was a mass shooting in a backyard at a barbecue, and 16 teenagers were shot and 3 people were killed. And this is like the 10th time this has happened, like in my recent memory. When I was in high school, one of the girls that went to my sister's school was shot and killed over Thanksgiving break my sophomore year of high school, in a drive-by shooting that was just a gang initiation. You know what I mean? These elements of violence obviously are, guns are a component. It's not just the gun part or anything like that. But obviously, like, these are really, really important things to discuss, because I feel like this country has such differing views on like how we should approach these tools, weapons, whatever you may view them as, and there is not really like a right or wrong way to go about that. But like, it is important to think about this in our own context, but also in a much larger context, right? And I'll hit you. I like stats. I think rooting ourselves in facts and figures can be a good jumping point, just to have at least a base understanding of where we're at. And so I just wanted to kind of, for those of you that don't necessarily know, Socket's here, exciting. And see, Ling just showed up. That's vibes. Welcome, fam. But the exact numbers of U.S. gun owners is actually pretty unclear, because there is no federal registration. It's all state, right? It's state by state. It's controlled state by state. So there is actually no requirement on a federal level to do like this official count. But there are many, many estimations used. They use plenty of data sets, and using these various different FBI data sets and several background check applications state by state and collecting and aggregating and analyzing this data. The National Firearm Trade Association estimates that there's about, oh wow, where are my actual stats? I don't even know. Estimate that there was over 12 million guns bought in the first many months of 2020 alone, which is actually up from last year. It's 70% more bought in that same time period in 2019, and included nearly 5 million new gun owners, right? And so these numbers are going up. And if you look at kind of recent trends, they have been going up. The availability has gone up. Ease of access in some places has gotten easier. Some places has gotten harder. Again, that's very, very state to state basis. But what has also been going up is the estimated number of deaths resulted directly from an injury related to a gun, which sits around 40,000 for the most recent year that we have data for, which is 2017. The one alarming stat that a lot of people are usually surprised by is that is actually mostly suicides. It's a significant majority, so about 66% of gun-related deaths are suicides, which is not necessarily how people may be thinking about it because of the way that the media portrays gun murders, right, and homicides that have to do with firearms. But nonetheless, as more people are increasing purchases and distribution of firearms has been increasing, there has been increasing opposition on the other side coming from the counter argument. And Joe Biden is actually, and Connor could probably speak to his policy much, much more than I can. But Joe Biden is, as far as I know, at least in my understanding, he's the first Democratic president to openly support, presidential candidate to openly support legislation that would actually involve confiscation, not just limiting new purchases or increasing regulations in terms of usage and purchase in the future, which I thought is really interesting and represents the kind of polarization that we've been talking about in this series as a whole, even all the way back to August when we first started doing this. The idea that we are going in this kind of diverging direction and these problems, call them problems or whatever, this discussion is pretty pertinent, right? Because if we are going on this diverging path, this is one of the things that's going to end up determining, how people, this could be one of the things that ends up determining how people vote, not only in this election, right, but in the midterms, mid-next presidency, right, and years following. And I think it's just a consistently pressing topic to talk about, especially when things like, Kenosha or whatever, when it is compounding factors that involve firearms, obviously that is a piece that needs to be discussed, right? And I am a human, I have opinions, right? But I'm not here to sway anyone's opinion. I'm not here to change anyone's mind, and say, come over to my side. Remember the idea of this, we had our little ground rule session. Oh, I have my ground rule slide pulled up. I'll share that real quick just so everybody can see that we mean, let's just be cool. So obviously ground rules, be respectful. This encapsulates no hate speech, no judgment. Obviously, if somebody has a dumb argument, tell them it's a dumb argument, but don't tell them they're dumb because we're attacking arguments, not people. And then please don't be afraid to engage. We just doubled the numbers since I started speaking. So that's exciting. Hopefully we can have a fruitful conversation regardless of, people's personal views. I think everybody understands that the need for respect is high and nobody wants to be disrespected on a Sunday. Or any day of the week for that matter. So let's not do that. But let's start with unless you're out, you have anything else to say, we can get it going with our opening question.
No, go for it, bro. I think you did a very good job starting it off.
All right.
As usual.
So obviously, I wonder if I could create a new poll. I don't feel like we need a poll. I just want to know who in here currently owns a gun or a firearm or would ever consider purchasing one, and why or why not. Personal views. Let's talk about a little bit, share your personal views on your individual. Do you own? Would you? Why? Sherrod can kick it off as per usual and then we can pass it on to everybody.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I have kind of a complicated opinion on guns. I think I guess being from Chicago, a lot of the narrative that's derived around like the violence that exists in Chicago is that it's like all gun violence and like the city is like super violent and kind of like what you were talking about before, Marcus. Some of it's like a lot of very localized crime in certain areas and a lot more about systemic issues than necessarily like the fact that there are guns. It's just the availability of guns, right? So I guess I don't know. Would I ever own a gun? I guess maybe and maybe, but probably not. Do I think that people like if people feel like they want to have guns and that's like a constitutional right, then I guess I can understand that personally. And I mean, who the fuck am I to say that like people shouldn't be able to have those things if they meet whatever necessary criteria, which also I'll meet with a caveat. I think needs to be like more sussed out better on like what people are capable and not of getting firearms and how people are able to acquire firearms. But yeah, me personally, I don't own one. Maybe in the distant future when I see like drastic changes in gun laws and maybe I feel like it's a safe thing, but also like I don't know, maybe not. I have a very complicated opinion. I don't know. What about y'all? What do you guys think?
I personally wouldn't want to own a gun, and I come from like a conservative small town with a couple military bases, and people go there like for hunting and stuff. And so I know a lot of gun owners, but my family never did. I've never hunted. I've never felt like I needed one for protection. And personally, my association with guns is just hearing about shootings and like negative effects of owning guns, and it just never really has enticed me to want to own one.
I might be in the minority here, but I do own several firearms for a variety of uses, variety of types. First one I bought was a handgun for primarily home defense. So I'd keep it near my nightstand or my desk or wherever I was in my house. Bad things happen, and I wanted to be prepared. Actually, no, that wasn't my first gun. My first gun was a shotgun to go dove hunting. Just a normal sporting type shotgun. But then when I turned 21, bought a handgun, and I've got a few more since.
I guess kind of going off of that, do you have a bunch of other friends that are also handgun owners? And I guess kind of what kind of like has owning guns been something common that's been in your family, or are you like the first person to be like a gun owner in your like immediate family? I guess what spurred your decisions? Like, why do you think that they're like a good thing to have? Yeah, I don't know. I'm interested in knowing your perspective.
All right, so I'll try to tackle those kind of one at a time. Most of my good friends do own handguns and other guns. I'm not sure if that's just kind of the background I came from, the people that I kind of gravitate towards, but yes, most of my closer friends do own at least a handgun, usually more than that. As far as my family goes, my mom doesn't really like guns, so we never had any guns in the house. My dad did grow up hunting, so he had a few shotguns, which have been at his dad's house and his brother's house back up in Iowa, where he's from. I'm from Texas, live in Texas, but his guns are up with his family. So then going back to kind of why I got them. Well, first off, I've always thought guns are cool, playing video games, watching movies, playing soldier in the backyard with my friends. It's kind of just always been there. And so then when I turned 18, I was like, oh, shoot, I could actually go out and do this now. Did that. Mom wasn't thrilled, but I was also leaving for college that fall. And so she knew it wasn't going to be in the house past that summer. And it was only maybe a month before it was out of there. But so going back to that, it's just kind of a personal thing, I think, more than kind of outside influences. I mean, obviously we've got the movies and the TV shows and the video games. But kind of as I've become an adult, it's more of I'd rather be prepared to react to situations that may happen to me, you know? If somebody decides to break into my house or, you know, rob me on the street, I don't want them to have an easy time with that. You know, I want to be able to kind of control the process and let things happen on my terms rather than being controlled by somebody else. That makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. And can you kind of describe a little bit what the process was like acquiring the guns? You said you're in Texas, yeah. So do you like what exactly is the permit like process like? How, I guess, easy or difficult would you describe being able to get certain types of guns in your experience?
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody else here has bought a gun before. Kind of seems like probably not. But so for normal firearms, you know, shotguns, rifles, handguns, it's actually a very simple process. You go to gun store of choice, whether that's Academy or Bass Pro Shop or, you know, a local mom and pop gun store. You pretty much tell them what you want. If they have it in stock, then they'll sell it to you right there. If not, they can order it, or you can order it and have it sent to them. That's the whole process. But then once you decide what you want, you fill out a form. It's called a 4473. It's a form established by the ATF. And you fill out, you know, personal information, your name, your address, social security number, basic identifying information about yourself. And there's a list of like 10 questions. Very simple. It's like, are you a convicted felon? Do you have violent misdemeanors? Do you have a history of drug abuse? Have you been committed involuntarily for mental illnesses? Things like that. It's basically just asking the disqualifying factors of yourself, the things that federally would bar you from owning a gun. So you fill out that form, give it back to the person at the counter. They take that form and go run a background check on you. That's run by the FBI. It's called the NICS check, National Instant Criminal System, something like that, where they run a background check on you. And it usually takes, you know, 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes for them to get the results back. And that's just a go or no go on whether they can sell you a gun. Sometimes if there's weird circumstances, that can take a while, but usually it's just a few minutes. When that comes back with a go, you pay for the gun, walk out the door. If it comes back with a no-go, I'm not exactly sure on what happens because I've never had one pop, you know, no-go like that before. I think it usually gives a reason, but I'm not 100% sure. But so there are also different types of firearms that are classified as National Firearms Act firearms. That's things like short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, explosives, silencers, machine guns, things like that. That's a bit more of a process. So for that, you have to send fingerprints to the ATF. You have to go through a bigger background check, and you have to pay $200 for a tax stamp. And that usually takes about 9 months to get approved. And then when that comes back to your dealer, then you can go pick up whatever it is you're buying.
For sure. Thank you. That was actually pretty informative. The process works very similarly, at least from what I know, in New York. Very similarly, registered, authorized dealer, same form, all that kind of thing. But I appreciate Trip for enlightening us. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, but I do want to keep it back rooted in our original. We'll touch on more like maybe like the registration processes and all of that stuff in maybe a few minutes. But I do want to hear from some other people about their like personal experiences, like feelings, and I'll touch on mine. Like I actually, both my parents are very like anti-violence as a whole, anti-violence, anti-weapon, right? But like there have definitely been times where it made a lot of sense to me to consider, you know, like having one handy just in case for that off chance situation of like, what if someone really does bust up in this house right now? Like, if it really came down to that, like, I have plenty of self-defense experience, but chances are that person coming in, busting into the house also has a weapon, and in that sense, I totally understand why I would like feel the need to have that. But that really only happened, like, I think the first time that really hit me was when I like was just living in New York recently on my second night there, and Carlos was there actually as well. On my second night there, the neighbor, bro, there was a neighbor living two houses down, and I got to know him pretty well. Like, he's a really nice guy ultimately, but like, it was like a random Thursday night, and me and Carlos were coming back to the house, and this dude was screaming in the street, like screaming his head off about somebody literally just parked in a spot, right? And this dude takes a baseball bat out of his trunk and takes off the car's mirrors that is parked in the spot on nothing, on no provocation, nothing. Literally baseball bats that shit, right? And if there's people that are that unstable, imagine if those are the people that then slip into the gangs and somebody is like, yo, go in the initiation, right? And literally the next day I'm hearing about the gang that's hanging out in the park right across the street who has just been linked to a series of home invasions on my block, right? When you read things like that, you're just like, well, that's fucked. If I don't, do like and these are areas like, or at least in my particular area, it's like, it's an area that police like fake patrol, they're not actually there to help anybody. They're just like intimidating and they don't get out of their cars and whatever. And in those in those areas, I totally understand why people would have something like that. You know what I mean? In another sense, I personally like, I don't hunt, and it's more about the animal part of the hunting, not about like the gun part of hunting at all. But Rochester is a very, very hunting forward place because we have a lot of wilderness, very, very near. So many deer, they can all go to hell. And in that sense, I'm like, who am I to stop somebody from shooting an animal that I already hate? And I actually think that, if people find joy in that and like they find it to be a sport, obviously if it's like endangered animals or whatever, that's a whole different thing. But like, there's a way to do that safely. There's definitely a way to do that safely. And like, there's definitely, I could see, myself in the future, maybe not owning for that purpose, but like eventually maybe going on like an elk hunting trip or something like that, in Colorado or something like that. I've had plenty of cousins do that. And you just like, clear the checks to be able to rent like a weapon through the company that is then running your tour or doing whatever. Right. And I would totally do that. I would definitely do that. And if it really came down to it, like if I found myself living in an area that I felt like I really had no other options for protections, I would definitely go through the process and send it and just have it in case. I don't know if I would really feel super comfortable with it like right next to me all the time, but hopefully be like locked up properly and would not be in the reach of like a child who could just like access it and fire it and all that. But I definitely could see myself in the future feeling like I need to, or for certain recreation activities, definitely utilizing them. In which case, if I'm renting something from somebody, right, then obviously I can't tell that person to not have them because then I can't use that service, which would be ridiculous. But I do want to hear some other people's opinions on where they stand on that.
I don't personally own a gun, but my father owns many guns. I'm from North Dakota, and he is a farmer, and he hunts a lot. So, he has shotguns, rifles. He has at least one handgun that I know of. They're all in a big safe in his office. But I know in North Dakota, as far as like procedural stuff, if you buy from a federally licensed seller, you have to have a background check. If you buy from a private seller, no background check is necessary. However, there are restrictions against like the federal restrictions against like people who cannot own firearms. Usually that has to do with like citizenship and like whether or not you've been convicted of a federal offense, those types of things. So it's relatively easy to purchase a gun in North Dakota. There is the background checks part of it. But like permitting, there's not a whole lot of laws on permitting and stuff. And I've held his guns. I've never fired them myself. I've been around when I've gone like trap shooting with him and then some of my coworkers who like trap shooting and stuff. So it's like clay, like they shoot little clay discs in the air and you fire at them. And I've never felt threatened by my father's guns. Like I'm always very comfortable knowing they're in the house. He also lives kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so the odds of there being like a home invasion are pretty low just because it's honestly not that easy to find his house. But I don't know. I haven't talked to him a whole lot about like I know most of his guns are for hunting purposes, but I don't know how he feels about like the protection. Like I'm sure he's like pro having a gun for protection, but I don't know if any of the guns he owns he would like say he purchased them for protective purposes, if that makes sense.
I'm waiting to see if the awkward silence is enough motivation for somebody to step in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Oklahoma, so we also, like, a lot of my friends also have guns and go hunting, and a lot of them have guns for protection as well. So I personally don't own a gun, and I have negative associations with guns as well. I've had a family member commit suicide with a gun, so something like that for me is a little bit more difficult on like knowing how well the background checks are, especially when you're talking about mental health background checks. That's something that we haven't touched on a ton. And as Tripp said, like there are disqualifying questions, but there's oftentimes like those disqualifying questions are, as you said, you're answering them personally. So like just wondering like how easy it is to say that you're fine on certain things, or how easy it is to maybe potentially like pass a mental health check for something like that. So that's just kind of like my thoughts with it and kind of like my associations with it. So some of my concerns going forward with how things are regulated, I guess.
I appreciate that point, Carlos, like the mental health check. And I actually think that that is obviously part of like the much larger conversation in terms of like if we think they should be legal or illegal. Like at the core of it all, right? That is like at the core of the debate is like, should we even have them or should we not have them? Right. And I'm sure everybody, and if we do, there's obviously a spectrum or a level of legalization, kind of like with drugs and classification, right? Like there is just like, you know, as we know, there are classifications for weapons and like what extent to what extent each of those are like legalized or readily available for like civilian purchase and all of that stuff. And so I kind of want to break into that conversation in terms of like people's opinions. And again, like this isn't like we're not trying to find actual policy answers. Like we're not in you know, a think tank or a congressperson's office. Like this isn't like trying to find legitimate like solutions of like how exactly technically could that work with the government. Like fuck all that. I just want to hear people's like ideas and like imaginations about like if anything could be happening, like what ideally would be happening in your mind. Like what do you feel like is the best vision? Like legal, illegal, if so, what? And yeah, let's start with that and go from there. Sure.
I'll go. I think one thing that we need to take into account when we're having this conversation is that currently there are more guns than there are people in this country. So the idea of making them illegal now, we already missed our chance. It's too late now. But if we were to take steps to obviously limit the types of guns that people could acquire access to, if we were to institute, I know you said earlier that Biden is running on confiscation. It's not confiscation. He wants a gun buyback program. Maybe personally, I would support a confiscation type plan, but I think a gun buyback is a good first step. And I think just understanding that it's a huge uphill battle to counteracting gun violence and the effects that it has in our communities. And it's not going to happen just if you make guns illegal one day. There's so much other work that goes into that. It's not just an illegal versus legal conversation.
So I want to throw this out here real quick. I don't know exactly what Biden's plan entails. I know Beto O'Rourke here in Texas ran on a similar platform. I don't remember if it was in 2016 for the presidential nomination or in 2018 at a midterm or whenever it was. But some people have mentioned buybacks. And I think it's very important to make the distinction of voluntary versus mandatory. Because a voluntary buyback, you have a choice in the matter. You know, if you want to sell your gun back to the government, so you don't want it, you don't need it, you feel like it's a danger, then good for you. You're recognizing that. You can get rid of it, and that's the end of it. A mandatory buyback is a confiscation. Let's make that clear right now. I've seen plans that include penalties for not selling your gun back. And it's basically just a confiscation with some monetary return. If that distinction helps at all.
I think sure. The gun buyback piece of it as a concept, I understand like why the buyback would exist, and I do appreciate like the fact that there is even a monetary incentive. Again, like I'm actually not super run up on Biden's plan either. I know that Cuomo has come under fire by many a gun owner for having such an aggressive stance on gun control in New York specifically, and many of his plans have involved essentially what Tripp was saying, right? The idea that there is an open window of this particular set of firearms will be available for buyback in this period, and if you are found to have not, sold back the weapon that you registered and legally purchased or whatever, there is a fine or there is some sort of consequence like associated with that. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think if there is like a collective decision, a collective action of like people who review certain types of weapons and are like, yeah, this one is, as we found, is like way too dangerous for an average person to have. Like, I don't think there's necessarily a problem. Like the government does that all the time. It steps in, it says we can't have sugar, they tax sugar, right? There's plenty of applications of like the government, right, intervening in whatever people's affairs based on the assumption that they are doing what's in quote unquote everybody's like best interest. And I think if there was a way to figure out which ones were like fall into that category, then a mandatory, and again, obviously people may say like Second Amendment rights and all of that stuff, but I personally don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing.
I mean, I think another key part of it in terms of like the broad thing, should guns be legal versus illegal, is that there are a lot of people that use it as a primary way to get food. So I think that in order for everyone to hopefully get on kind of a similar page nationally about gun reform, I think we need to be very cognizant of the rhetoric that's being used around it in terms of like, again, like the common sense, the mental health checks. But again, it's a whole rabbit hole of trying to find the right wording and phrasing for all these conversations with people on the other side.
So Oscar, in that sense, do you think that even having some sort of federally normed policy is even a worthwhile thing to look into if, there are certain states where people do really have this great need for like tools to eat and survive in whatever form, and that tends to fall geographically, at least in this country. Do you think that it should be federally?
I think in terms of like background checks and as what's called common sense gun reform, I think that's definitely something that can be implemented very well federally. But I think there are a lot of people that are frightened when they hear all this talk about buying guns back and stricter gun laws, because again, that is their kind of again, sport, recreation, but also food. So I think on the whole, you can do some stuff federally, but maybe the messaging would be more helpful to kind of be regional.
Okay, so you threw out common sense gun control measures. Do you have any kind of high level ideas of what that would include? Because I've heard some various packagings of that are on one end of the spectrum or the other. So I was just wondering if you...
Again, yeah, it is a very broad term, and I think people use it to fit a lot of different things in there. But I think it's commonly referred to as, again, like the background checks, any mental health red flags in your past, like the no-fly list. Like if you're on a no-fly list, then you can't get a gun. I think those are kind of like the starting points of what people mean by the term, and that's where I kind of use it as. But I do think that using that very broad term is allowing people to kind of package more things in there.
On that note, then, in terms of like reforms, or even like to the point of disarmament, talking about buybacks and all that stuff, and the qualms that Oscar just brought up, like what do we think? Like, what do we think is like an appropriate way to approach like managing this safety versus freedom qualm, or which is commonly, you know, one of the arguments is like, well, more guns, less safety, which that doesn't necessarily, I don't think necessarily rings true. But in terms of this broad, we keep talking about this broad umbrella or whatever, I think that the measure of like background checks versus no fly list versus other stuff, like, does anybody have any other ideas on like what do they think would be a worthwhile reform to look into? Or in terms of disarmament, like, is a buyback program worthwhile, or are there other options for that? And then one other point I wanted to throw in there is like law enforcement and military, right? Like especially non-active duty, you know, or like retired military, right? Like if you're a sniper, like, and somebody comes up to you and is like, well, even though you have all of this incredible amount of specialized training, you still can't have an assault rifle as a civilian. Like that is obviously another qualm for a significant portion of the population. Sorry if that was too many things, but I hope gave somebody a jumping point.
One thing I'm interested in knowing is how well do people who own guns actually know how to use them? Because just thinking about safety, I mean, yeah, like as a woman, I want to feel safe in the environment that I am, and situationally, sometimes like my pepper spray isn't enough, and I can see how a presence of a gun can help secure those sense of safety. But what concerns me is that firing a gun is so irreversible. And I think of like examples in pop culture, like the movie Juice, where Tupac just kind of shot his friend accidentally. And like, I guess the question is like, do people who own them currently know how to properly use them? And like, is that a part of the current background check?
So I can only speak to some people that I know personally. But like my best friend's parents, they've recently had break-ins in their neighborhood. So over the last year, they bought a firearm. They go to the range about twice a week and practice shooting, and practice like and learn about like situational awareness when it comes to like firing your gun. So they do practice that. And I know a lot of my other friends, they do go to the range to like practice aim and practice like controlling their gun, as well as kind of learning like situational awareness around when to use it. But like I said, I can only speak to the people that I know that do those things.
I can kind of jump in with the alternate perspective of people that I know personally who strap themselves up, and I use that term very intentionally, right? It's people that do not understand the finality of what it means to fire a gun, that do not understand the gravity of the situation, and who I would obviously I'm not like naming names or anything like that, but who oftentimes actually have plenty of illegal access to street firearms and things that just like come up out of somebody's trunk, right? And their reasoning is like, yeah, I want it for safety because this is a dangerous environment, right? But I know for a fact those people have those guns in hiding. Like they can't openly go to a firing range if you don't have a gun license. Like you can't walk in there with an illegal weapon and be like, I'm just gonna, or at least I don't know, how diligent some of the background or some of the immediate checks in the firing ranges around here are. But chances are you're not just gonna be like walking around flashing a weapon that you could be in jail for possessing. And in that sense, I think it's extra super dangerous because they aren't able to practice. They aren't able to learn those lessons of like, how do I fire this? More importantly, how do I control this? And those are the people that end up getting involved in, like, to Kavisha's point, right? These wild accidental, quote unquote, gun accidents, right? Where somebody is just being dumb and is fucking around with it without the safety on, and like it goes off, and who knows what happens. And I think to that point as well, like these people that are getting these particular subgroup of people are also like actively involved in like threatening and being the aggressor and being the recipient of like many of these kind of like violent episodes. And in those cases, when you have a bunch of people together then with firearms that they don't know how to properly use, then it gets really, really, really extra dangerous. And that is a situation, that's what caused, what was in Rochester not too long ago, because there was only one initial shooter, and all the people who just happened to have, back pocket weapons decided to try and see who could nab the person that was the first person to start shooting, right? And then extra people ended up being injured. And that is what really scares me, because I don't think everybody truly understands how to use them and what it means to truly fire a gun, especially in the presence of or at another person. And that I don't know, that's not really a thought or a question or anything. That's just like my 2 cents.
I think in the same vein, another thing that a little bit worries me is the chronology of first you buy the gun and then you go out, practice using it, and you learn the safety measures. And this could just be me not knowing, what exactly a gun license entails. But the lack of kind of, in any high risk situation, anything that requires a license, to drive a car, you take driver's ed. To go scuba diving, you have to go take safety courses and get a license for that. In the same vein, you don't, and please correct me if I'm wrong or don't know, but have to go, prove a certain amount of like safety and efficacy, and like that you understand the procedures and the seriousness of operating a gun in order to obtain one. From the process that we were walked through a little while ago, it sounds like, you can walk into a store, if everything checks out, you walk out with a firearm without knowing literally how to operate it. And again, you can take it upon yourself to go to the firing range and to learn how to use it afterwards. But it should, logically be the other way around, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Okay, so I can kind of chime in a little bit on this. Think of it like buying versus driving a car, right? You go up to a car dealership, you don't really have to have a driver's license to buy a car, right? You can just buy it, pay cash, finance it, whatever. You don't have to be able to drive to buy a car. It's kind of the same way with a gun. You can go in as long as your background check clears and whatever, you can buy the gun, but then to carry it, you generally have to go through a concealed carry class. And those requirements are pretty much, every end of the spectrum, depending on what state you're in. But in Texas, it's a 6-hour in-person class and then a shooting test. And you have to score above, a certain percentage on the actual written test at the end of the class. And you have to shoot so well on the actual shooting test to pass. And then you can go submit your information to the state, and then they'll give you the license generally. And just like in driving, you have to go through driver's ed, you have to go through the classes, you have to take driving tests, before you get the license to drive the car that you could have had sitting in your driveway for 6 months. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that was helpful. Actually, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In North Dakota, in the same vein as that, I can't talk about concealed carry because I don't know a lot about that. But in terms of hunting, in order to like get a hunting tag, which means like you literally have like a tag that you put on whatever it is that you shot to like legally be hunting, because they do, especially with like bigger animals like moose or even deer, they limit the number of people who can like legally kill a deer, right? Because they don't want overhunting to happen. And in order to obtain a hunting tag, you have to go through a process called hunter safety, where you go to a class, and I think you have to be at least 12. I know that sounds really young, but I do know friends who went through it in like middle school. And you sit in a course. I want to say it's like at least 8 hours worth of training, and then you pass a test in order to receive a hunting tag.
In New York, it's the same. There's also a hunting safety course, and I also know friends in middle school who did that, and I thought that was kind of crazy as well. They were like, "Yeah, I'm going on a hunting trip," and I was like, "You're 11, like, or 12 or whatever it was, and I thought that was like kind of crazy because like still though, like a 12-year-old handling a shotgun to go, duck hunting is like kind of like, at least to me that seems like a wild concept, because I think like the age piece of it, like if you can shoot a gun before, kind of, I don't want to go back to the car analogy, but like before you can drive a car, I think that's also kind of another way that we could, like, if we just push the age limit up, right? Like if you can't let kids below the age of at least 16 or something like that hunt, then that definitely would limit the risk of, mistakes of like, oh, I'm 12, they're definitely old enough to be able to know how to get in and out of a gun safe. And like, it's not like it's a baby who's like, pawing at the glass. It is like a fully sentient 12-year-old that could be like, oh, I'm going to go show my friend something cool, and they go out in their backyard or whatever, and they start shooting, and like, God forbid somebody's like walking or something something happens. And I think that would also be another way, like moving the age up, to your point, Marty, like, would definitely.
So off of that, generally speaking, if you're under like 16 or 18, you have to be with an adult when you're hunting. You can't just send a 12-year-old out into the woods. Say,
Yeah, no, I'm not saying
deer.
like sending it into the woods like for the hunting trip specifically. I'm just saying like if you feel like you're emboldened by like that hunting trip you took with your dad, right? You come back and then something, in the house or in the backyard or whatever, something can happen. My fault, Chip. I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Do you think that brings up like a super interesting like kind of like cultural difference that happens like as you go throughout the United States, and kind of like how people are raised and a little bit of like what environments people were grown up in, right? So for example, sure, from what it sounds like you had like experiences from when you were younger of people around you that like that had guns or whatever, and that's kind of like made you comfortable with the idea of doing that. I feel like kind of like Marcus was saying, I have plenty of friends who also used to be like on the younger hunting things as well, and I think interestingly enough, those are probably the people who understand like the gravity and like the usage of guns, probably like some of the best because they've been doing it for that longer period of time. So I think that's somebody to be taken with like a grain of salt. But yeah, no, I think it's like super fascinating to see because like for example, like a lot of us. I mean, I don't own a gun. I don't really have too much experience with the guns thing, and that probably foreshadows a great deal of the like degree of maybe my like lack of comfortability with it, is because I don't have that experience, and like kind of going out and maybe testing those things is like, I don't know if those are good or bad things, but like that I think that's just like something that was super fascinating to me to see, is like sociocultural differences that happen from like, excuse me, from region to region.
Yeah, no, going off of that, I think the reason that I have like, I don't know, the opinions or the biases that I have against guns come from my parents' beliefs about guns, because they do come from Canada, and a lot of the culture there is a lot less, there's a lot less of this idea of like guns and Second Amendment being part of your like identity. because unless you're a police officer or someone like another agent that uses a weapon for work, there's not concealed carry. And a lot more of, like, you can have them at home for protection, but it's a lot more regulated. And then a lot more of the ideas behind guns are rooted more strictly in just like using them for hunting. And so guns in my parents never really understood the whole like idea of the way that guns are talked about in the US. And so that was just kind of why I know so little about it and have almost, no understanding outside of like, I know people that hunt up where in Canada where my grandparents like are, but that's like all that the experience that I have, because that's just not at all a part of the culture that my parents like grew up with. So it is interesting, like regionally and depending on the country, like how different ideas behind guns can be.
Yeah, to that point, in terms of like how you're raised, I will say that like I do have a lot of friends that hunt. I never did, just because honestly, mostly because I didn't have time. I was a busy kid, but like I would say that the first thing that, and I would say that this is pretty like universal across all of my friends that I grew up with, and I grew up in a larger city for North Dakota, like it was 60,000, and the first thing that you learn is like respect. Like you learn respect of the firearm. Like that's how you're raised. Like your parents sit you down. Like if you are in a house that the hunting like is a thing that someone in your family does, like you're sat down at a very young age. You're told to like you don't touch these unless you're with your parent. Like you learn respect for the firearm. Like that's one of the first things that I ever remember in relation to like the guns in our house. And so at least from my perspective, yeah, so like the communities that are raised more for on like the guns for hunting do have like an enormous amount of respect behind like the power that you have when holding a firearm.
I feel like kids could really take that for granted, though. I just remember there was this one time I was in high school, specifically, and another friend, we'll call him Mike for now because his name is actually Mike, but we don't need to get into that. This kid, Mike, right? I've known this kid for a long time now, and he's not a dumb kid, right? Like this is a smart guy, and sometimes kids just do dumb stuff to like impress their friends. And in this particular case, right, we were already in high school, which you should totally be of decision-making age by the time you get to high school, right? And it was just one of those things. We were drinking. They decided, it would be fun. Let's go fuck around with the guns at the gun safe, right? And obviously nothing bad happened in this particular instance, but I know that's not the first time that it happened. And I know that he's not the only person that I know that does things like that, right? Because it's just like something to Tripp's point, right? Like if you're a 14-year-old kid, like that is a cool thing to have around. That is a cool thing to have around. And if your other homies don't have that in their house, like they may be interested or fascinated in like seeing that or even seeing it fired or whatever, right? And and this kid really just like took it straight out, did the whole bit, like fake pointed it at somebody, everything. Thankfully, I know for a fact it wasn't loaded, but like it on the off chance that it is, you don't load it before you put it back in the safe. Who knows what could happen, right? But those situations is definitely like what stresses me out, right? I don't mind if somebody has like their safe is in their house and there's a presence of weapons there, like somebody has one for protection or whatever. But I just like worry, right? Like if I was an adult and I was growing up, where I had kids who were like growing up in even say like the community that I grew up in, which is a relatively safe place, like that is a situation that I would definitely not want my kids, being in on the off chance that something terrible happens. But that's just my personal experience. Word. I think that this has been a really good conversation. I think to a lot of our points about this is a much larger, it's a very spectrumed issue. Like there's so people on like whatever end of the spectrum, whether it be, how they feel about regulation or reform or personal freedoms or whatever. I just wanted to say, like, I don't think I've ever had a conversation that had to do with the topic as heated as this, where people could have such differing perspectives, and still maintain like such decorum and like actually be able to like learn something from like people, like a lot of people said things that I had not heard about previously or did not, understand, or just sharing experiences of like how they've interacted with this particular topic, right? And I think it's going to be really important for people to think about not only this topic, but some of the other ones that we've talked about in the past, or just some of the more important topics that come up consistently surrounding an election specifically, and really just think hard, not even about the presidential election, because like, yeah, absolutely. Trip just sent me a message, and I'll toss it over to you in just 1 second, and I'll do my little spiel for a half a sec. But I think in terms of the presidency, that's one thing, right? But now is the opportunity to be able to really make some impact in like state legislatures, and guns is a really good example of that because things are still controlled at the state level. And if there are things that you really disagree with, or things that you really feel like there's certain officials in your state that are pushing one way or another, like that's some shit to search up on. That's some shit to read up on. Because I think there is a way to safely go about regulating and making sure that everybody is safe, but also, there's this idea that we really can't be infringing on people's personal freedoms, because like this is America at the end of the day, and this is something that has been ingrained in our culture since the beginning. It was forged in musket balls, and it's going to continue to be, there are going to continue to be people who respect and honor the weapons and like do the right things. And I don't think it's our job, or our, at least it's not my job to try and tell those people that are doing the right things, to like fuck off or whatever. But it is 6 o'clock, so I did want to take the opportunity to let anybody leave. But Trip asked if he could throw out an opportunity for a Q&A before we wrap it up, and I think that's an absolutely great idea. So if anybody has any more specific questions that you think, this was for you, right, to direct at you, or just for a Q&A in general?
Yeah, so I know a lot about guns, both from my experience as an owner and as a shooter, but also as doing countless hours of just research and reading and finding out the little things that most people don't either care about or pay attention to. So I just wanted to open it up. I know a lot of people don't know a lot about guns, both from like a technical standpoint, but also policy and things like that. So I just wanted to open it up. If anybody has questions that they want answered, throw them out.
I have a question. Oh, sorry,
okay.
You go. No, you go.
Okay. I live in Texas too. So my question was like, you detailed like going through the whole process. At any point did you like kind of like think about everything you were kind of like checking off and go like, this seems pretty chill, or like this doesn't seem like a lot for me to do?
Yeah, the first time when I bought my shotgun, it was kind of weird. It was like, this seems really simple, and just kind of overly straightforward. But I've gone through the process a few times, and every time it's just like, they already have ways of checking all of these things. If it asks if you're a convicted felon, the FBI is going to find out if they want to know, and they run that background check on you anyway. And so it's pretty much just kind of an honor check on you, if you're willing to lie about those things that are fairly easy to find out. So the more that I've done it, it's really just come down to that. I'm not lying about this. All of this info that they're asking for is already available to the people who need it. Why do I need to worry about it?
Do you feel like there's ample, I guess, like mental health checks that are put in place besides just like the personal, like personal validation, or personal, like checklist of, oh, I have or have not X, Y, or Z? Like, do you feel like there could be other things that could be done that would be better suited? Or do you feel like the policy is well suited for, what the federal government deems as necessary to hold a firearm?
So I think the current spot right now, so the only federal disqualifier, as far as I know, for mental health is being involuntarily committed to a mental institution. So if you're on suicide watch or whatever, and they actually come pick you up and take you to a hospital, as far as I know, that's the only kind of
It is
hard stop federally.
It's the only federally. The only thing is if you get admitted to a hospital and actually some states will like let that, if you were admitted by a family member, quote unquote, involuntarily, that doesn't even count sometimes. Sometimes it has to be the police were called and you were taken to a facility because you were literally on the brink of harming yourself or somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And I think other mental issues, the water gets really muddy really quickly on it being kind of a disqualifying factor, because like a lot of people go through, depressive episodes where they're just not feeling great. They're not thinking about killing themselves or other people or anything like that. But maybe that was 5 or 10 years ago and they've been fine since. Should that be a disqualifier? If somebody's taking antidepressants, it could be for a variety of reasons. Things like that, where it's really hard to like draw a line and say, hey, no, you can't, even though it may not matter. Does that make sense?
For sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Trip, I don't want to try to make you like a representative for the gun community because I think that would be very unfair. But I did want to hear your thoughts a little bit about gun culture from a racial perspective, because a lot of what I see, I was a journalism major, and I do a lot of stuff in the media world. And it seems like a lot of the discourse around guns, it's a lot of, we are very pro militia in terms of white militias. We kind of give this idolization to them exercising their Second Amendment rights in that way. But vice versa, we will demonize Black people who are found to be carrying gun owners, like Philando Castile, or there was a story last week about Breonna Taylor posing with guns. Trayvon Martin, after that situation, people on the right used pictures of him with guns to show, oh, he was worthy of being killed, because he was a threat to society. So I wonder, from the gun community's perspective, like, how will we be counteracting that moving forward? If we are going to be living in a society where guns are as prevalent and remain to be legal, we need to find a way to reach an equilibrium where people are not demonized on race for owning something legally.
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot to unpack. But I think it's an interesting dynamic, because my personal belief is that pretty much anybody who wants a gun, as long as they're not, a crazy person and they're not, a dangerous person or have a violent past, if they want one for pretty much whatever reason, as long as they don't hurt anybody else, they should be able to have it. White people, Black people, men, women, whoever. There's a lot of sentiment similar to that in the gun community. But there is also a lot of overlap between the gun community and like the white nationalist community, basically. And I don't know where that split lies. I think most of the gun community is more on my side, where it's don't hurt anybody else. If you want a gun, go get one. Versus, the assholes, basically. And, I'm a big fan of people exercising their rights, peaceful protest, Second Amendment, all of that. As long as you're not hurting anybody, we're good. And I don't like that people are using those types of, photos or whatever to demonize or kind of try to justify someone being killed. That's horrible. So I think there needs to be a lot more education across the board, because there's a lot of people who think they shouldn't have a gun because of what the image is going to be like. And I don't think that's a good way to be. If you don't want a gun, don't get one. If you want one, go get one. You shouldn't think about how it affects your image, I guess that makes sense. there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused about your last point around image, because I guess it kind of plays to my broader point that it seems to me that white people are able to kind of glorify their gun ownership, and they are able to pose with their guns, and they are able to show them out hunting with their buddies, whatever, and they are not demonized for that kind of behavior.
Right.
If something goes wrong, right? Like Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha. But if somebody of color owns a weapon and poses for it in pictures in the same way, it's used as justification by conservatives who are traditionally pro-gun. And so it's one of those things where it's like, you personally are not the problem, but it's the community at large, I think, not really understanding that overlap and their need to kind of get past their racial prejudice and their prejudice that is so pro-police, anti-crime, whatever we deem to be crime, in favor of just being pro-Second Amendment across the board,
Right. So one point real quick. If you take a photo pointing a gun at the camera, that's really dumb, period. It shouldn't be used to justify, killing someone. That's beyond stupid. But pointing a gun at a camera, not a good idea. I don't know how we reconcile that, to be completely honest with you. I think it's going to take some pretty significant cultural shifts to do that. I don't know. I'd have to look into it a little more. Because
Can I jump in?
Go for it.
Just, I think, Connor, I don't think that necessarily falls within the community of, to Chip's point, I think there is a lot of overlap. Obviously, a lot of like white nationalists or people that identify as this sort of like white supremacists, whatever it may be, do own a lot of weapons, and I do, or just obviously the facts generally do lend themselves to like more like the highest subcategory of people that own guns are obviously conservative white males. And that is just like how it happens, right? But I think conservative white males run the entire fucking thing. They run the whole country. They run the media companies that are pushing the news cycle. They run the policies that are being the policies that are in effect demonizing these black people, or things like stop and frisk, or surveillance policies that target particular communities. Like, I don't think it's necessarily just the obviously when things like this happen and people, it comes down to a matter of image. That is just going to be a reflection. What then gets published, that image that is published, is just going to be a reflection of like how the general society views and demonizes people of color in general. And a black gun owner, that's just another reason for people to demonize them. Just like a black drug addict is just another reason to demonize people, even though there are more white drug addicts than there are black drug addicts. Like, when the numbers don't actually reflect what is the situation, right? And I think guns is just another way, and especially when it's something as polarized and as two-sided as like these two very different images and people's reactions to those two images, or the two very similar images, and the only difference being the white person versus the black person, and people's very different reactions to that, then comes down to the average everyday person looking at themselves and being like, do I really feel like black people are more readily dangerous or more likely to be dangerous? And do I really have this internal bias on my end to look at this picture and say, well, obviously this black guy holding a gun must be a criminal because I hold that bias because of whatever reason, right? And that reason may be different for every individual. But I think that when it applies to a situation like this, I think it is up to organizations like the NRA, organizations that are, pro-gun and gun owner, to intercede that discourse in the media and say, hey, we're not here to demonize, just like you're saying in our conversation right now. Like, if the broader majority is aligned with you, which I totally believe is the case, they're the ones, these moderate, sensible voices are the ones that need to like step into this discourse and step into the news cycle and be like, let's stop for a sec and disassociate these two issues, right? We as a society support Second Amendment rights and anybody's right to do that, and speak out against the demonization of black people in that moment. that I think is a responsibility of the gun community, right? I don't think it's necessarily because of the gun community's demonization. I think the demonization comes from all directions, and I think it is the gun community's responsibility that if you are, and I think some organizations do a pretty good job of this. Some of the smaller, maybe not the NRA, but some of the smaller, especially localized organizations, like Hunting Association of New York, or like these smaller organizations are really trying to just open, not bother anybody and not have anybody bother them, and just let everybody, hunt or do whatever they will with their firearms. But like when it comes down to a matter of like these organizations are now being associated with these white nationalists, like somebody needs to fucking wake up in an office somewhere and be like, yo, we need to disassociate from that narrative and disassociate from these literal terrorists. You know what I mean? Which obviously is kind of a tangential point.
Yeah, you put that into words better than I did.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. So, any more questions? No?
I think
so. You mentioned the NRA. They're actually not, a lot of the gun community are not fans of the NRA with how they've handled, kind of gun politics as a whole, including myself. I'm not a fan of the way they run their organization and what they do. But there's two groups that I really like. Generally speaking, they're on the less gun control side of the debate, but it's the Firearms Policy Coalition and Gun Owners of America. They're much smaller than the NRA, but they have a lot more kind of rooted arguments in what they stand for. And they are very much a, rights for everybody, not just the people we like or the people we say can have them. It's, we're doing this for everybody. Come get on board. I really like them. I support what they do. And so if y'all are interested in at least kind of learning more about the conversation, I would highly recommend checking those two groups out. That's the Firearms Policy Coalition and Gun Owners of America.
I'm going to pop that in the chat as well for the everyone chat. I'm going to pop that to y'all. And we usually post recaps of these meetings. And so we'll definitely include that. And I think that's important, right? And the whole idea, and Trip and I, for those of you that don't know, Trip is actually Maggie's older brother. They all know, they've met Maggie through Zoom in the past, but Trip reached out to me and asked specifically, if we had the perspective, people from his perspective. And I begged him, I was like, please come so you could, talk about this. Cause the whole fucking idea is to have a conversation like this. I don't know about y'all, but like, I don't think I've ever been able to have a discourse that covers everything that we just talked about. Like even, obviously we didn't go like super deep or anything like that into any one particular kind of vertical, but the fact that we touched on all this shit and nobody like yelled or, got super heated or said something racist, like, that's a win in my book. So I appreciate all of you. I appreciate everybody contributing, and we'll definitely be in touch about like, the other stuff. Next week is drugs, which I am personally super
excited for.
Cause that's my favorite topic.
Who doesn't love them?
So next week is drugs, and I think that one will hopefully get even more heated, because I think that debate can get very nitpicky, especially based on people's personal experiences. So I hope everyone is able to join for that one. Please, please, please tell your friends, tell everybody. It's the same time next Sunday and the Sunday after. We'll be on lock over here. So I will be blasting out on social media. Also, yeah, Trip just sent me a message privately. As you said, if anyone wants to chat online, feel free to hit him up. And it is TRIPP Lennon on Instagram and all that stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream right here, and the recording right